146 BC. Carthage burns, and the walls that once protected generations now glow red in the night like the edge of a blade. Smoke crawls through the streets, turning the sun into a dim, bloody circle in the sky. In the distance, the sound of collapsing roofs mixes with screams that have not stopped for 3 days. Now those screams are on your street. This is the house where you grew up, where you were married, where your children took their first steps on cool stone floors worn smooth by bare feet. Outside, boots slam on cobblestones, metal scrapes against shields, and someone is sobbing in the next doorway, but you do not dare look. Your husband left a week ago to defend the walls. He has not come back. You already understand what silence means in a city that is dying. Your 12-year-old son is in the cellar, pressed into the darkness between clay jars and bundles of grain. You told him not to move, not to speak, no matter what he heard above his head. His small fingers clutched your dress when you pushed him down those steps, but you closed the door anyway, your heart pounding so loudly that it drowned out his whispered questions. Then with splinters, the front door gives way with a crack like a bone breaking. 3 soldiers step through the dust and shattered planks. They do not roar or boast. They move with the slow confidence of men repeating a familiar task, eyes scanning corners, hands already knowing where to reach. One seizes your arm with a grip that leaves instant bruises. Another walked from room to room, kicking aside furniture, lifting curtains stripped of color by years of sunlight. The third pauses, listening, then turns toward the cellar door. You hear it, the small scrape of the latch, the creak of hinges, and then your son's voice, high and terrified, calling your name. It cuts through the noise of the burning city like a knife. Before you can move, the sound is choked off. A short cry, a thud, and then nothing but the crackle of flames outside and the harsh breath of the soldier holding you. That is the last time you ever hear him. They drag you outside, bare feet stumbling over broken pottery and fallen tiles, past doorways you once passed every morning on your way to the market. In the street, other women stand in tight clusters, shoulders touching but eyes fixed on the ground. The baker's wife, whose laughter you used to carry across the square. The priest's daughter, who once brought flowers to the temple in woven baskets. Your neighbor, with whom you traded gossip while hanging laundry. Now no one speaks. Silence hangs heavier than the smoke. An officer walks between you like a buyer inspecting animals at a fair. His armor is polished despite the ash that settles on everything else. His hand lifts chins, pulls open mouths to count teeth, presses fingers into arms to feel for muscle. Beside him, a scribe scratches symbols onto a wax tablet, numbers and notes that decide futures in a language you cannot read. The officer does not ask for your names. Names are irrelevant. To him, this is inventory and quota, not grief and family. Her name was Alyssa. At least, that is the name her mother whispered into her ear when she was a child, while braiding her dark hair on quiet evenings. In a few weeks, the name will no longer exist anywhere outside of memory. It will be replaced first by a number, then by a Latin word that has no roots in her language, no connection to her past. But in this square, with flames reflecting in her eyes and the heat of the ruined city on her skin, she still believes the worst is past. She thinks survival means safety. She is wrong. What you are picturing is not some twisted story invented for drama. It unfolded in Carthage, in Corinth, in Jerusalem, and in countless other cities that chose to defy Rome and lost. These scenes repeated like a ritual whenever resistance met Roman victory. Rome did not simply conquer territory. It harvested human lives on an industrial scale. It was not enough to win battles. The empire needed bodies, tens of thousands of them, to keep fields plowed, mines dug, roads maintained, and villas supplied with servants. Without a constant influx of enslaved people every decade, the system would begin to starve. Men captured in war died quickly, cut down on battlefields, or executed once they surrendered. A sword ended their value in an instant. But women were treated differently. Women of the conquered were not random victims of chaos. They were resources to be categorized, transported, and exploited according to rules refined over centuries. There was a structure behind the horror, a machine with procedures and manuals designed to squeeze as much use as possible from every living person it processed. Today, you will walk through that machine step by step. Subscribe to the channel if you want more untold history, and prepare yourself. The story begins in the final days of Carthage. On the morning of May 29th, 146 BC, the last defenders of Carthage had fallen quiet on the walls. After 3 relentless years of siege, months of hunger, disease, and desperate sorties, the city was finally broken. But what came next was not the frenzied plunder of popular imagination. There were no disorganized mobs of drunken soldiers tearing through houses for sport. Instead, something colder took control of the streets: discipline. Roman legions advanced through Carthage in organized blocks, shields aligned, standards raised above the smoke. Officers unrolled small scrolls, reading clear instructions that had been written long before the gates fell. Leather pouches hung at their belts, holding lists, quotas, and procedures. The operation had a name in certain military documents: the Harvest Protocol. The word itself reveals everything. Not a rescue, not even a raid. A harvest, as if these streets were fields, and the people living here were nothing more than a crop to be gathered at maturity. Within the first 6 hours, the Romans already had classification stations running in the main squares. Tables were set up in the open air, stacked with tablets, ink, and cords for binding. Scribes sat ready, styluses poised, while lines of soldiers escorted groups of civilians to be processed. Dust, ash, and sweat coated everyone. But the work moved forward with relentless precision. The chaos of the city's destruction was forced into rows and columns, turned into categories and numbers. The rule for men above 12 years old was brutally simple. They were separated from their families and marched a short distance away. There were no hurried executions or wild strikes fueled by rage. The boys and men were lined up in groups of 50, weapons already confiscated, eyes wide with disbelief as they stared at the ground or searched for loved ones. Then, one group at a time, they were removed. The Romans had learned from earlier conquests that leaving male captives alive meant dealing with uprisings decades later, when traumatized boys grew into angry men with nothing left to lose. They had paid for that mistake in blood before and would not repeat it here. For the women, the path diverged. Alyssa waited in line under the hot sky for 7 hours, watching shadows stretch and shrink as the day passed. Around her, the city crackled and groaned, buildings collapsing into themselves as fires hollowed them out. The women in front of her moved forward one by one to stand before the table, each going through the same sequence of touch and inspection. Some flinched, some stared straight ahead as if emptied of emotion. When it was Alyssa's turn, a Roman officer stepped close and grasped her jaw, turning her face from side to side. His fingers smelled of metal and sweat. He pried open her mouth to peer at her teeth, like a butcher checking the quality of an animal. His hands slid along her arms, pressed in her shoulders, and measured the curve of her waist, not with desire but with calculation. Then he nodded once and scratched 2 short words onto his tablet: Primi 4. First quality. She did not understand the language. She did not know that this label meant she had just been classified as a premium product, that her youth and health made her more profitable. She could not imagine that this would increase the length of her suffering, that those 2 words would echo silently behind every decision made about her from that moment forward. Young women between 14 and 25 were considered the finest stock. Records from the Carthaginian campaign speak of 4,200 women in this category, each one reduced to an entry in a ledger, each one priced like a piece of livestock. In just 6 days, about 50,000 people were processed in this way, counted, registered, sorted, and allocated. 25,000 of them were women. Picture a modern sports stadium filled to capacity. Now imagine every seat occupied not by cheering spectators, but by captives standing in lines, holding their children's hands, clutching whatever scraps of their old lives they still possessed. That is the scale of what passed through Rome's system in less than a week, all managed with the chilly regularity of factory. 3 days later, Alyssa shuffled up a wooden gangplank, wrists bound in front of her with rope rough enough to eat into the skin. The harbor roared with voices and movement. Ships bobbed in the water, their hulls scorched by stray embers drifting from the burning city behind. The smell was a violent mix of tar, salt, smoke, and human bodies packed too closely together. Orders were shouted in Latin from the docks, echoed by officers on decks, while chained columns of women stumbled forward like a single, broken creature. The world narrowed as she stepped below deck. The light vanished almost immediately, replaced by a thick, damp darkness that clung to the lungs. The air reeked of sweat that could not evaporate, fear so intense it seemed to have its own odor, and a sour stench of waste with nowhere to go. The walls sweated moisture. The ceiling was low enough that taller women had to stoop. When Alyssa pressed her back against the rough planks, she realized the sound of the sea would be her only view of the outside world. These were not ordinary merchant vessels hastily repurposed. Design choices revealed something far more calculated. Ventilation shafts cut through the upper deck to funnel air into the holds, systems for storing and distributing water, drainage channels slanting toward discrete openings so that filth could flow away. These ships were built for one function: to transport living human cargo over long distances while keeping enough of them alive to ensure profit at the other end. Floating prisons, engineered to be just survivable enough. Alyssa found a place to sit against the hull, shoulder pressed against another woman she vaguely recognized from a nearby street in Carthage. The space around them filled quickly, knees and elbows tangling until everyone was trapped in place by the weight of other bodies. Little by little, the ship came alive. The groan of wood, the slap of waves, and a low murmur of whispered prayers and languages from different neighborhoods, different villages. No one talked about the future. The future had been taken away. Once a day, a sailor descended the ladder carrying a bucket of water and a bag of hard bread. The bread was so dry it scraped the mouth, but hands reached for it anyway. There was never enough. The water ran out before every thirst was quenched. This was intentional. Scarcity turned prisoners against one another, pushing them to fight for crumbs instead of banding together against their captors. When two women struggled over a piece of bread, a guard smirked and watched, saying nothing. Control did not always require chains. Often, hunger did the work. Meanwhile, ship captains logged everything. They recorded how many captives boarded, how many disembarked, who fell ill and when, who stopped eating, who died and on which day. They noted weight loss and weakness the way a modern manager might report damage to goods in transit. On average, mortality during the voyage hovered around 15%. 1 out of every 7 women who walked up the gangplank never set foot on land again. For the Romans, this proportion was not a tragedy. It was an accepted cost, predicted and accounted for. Bodies thrown into the sea were listed alongside spoiled supplies and broken barrels in the same emotionless handwriting somewhere around the 3rd week. The boundaries of time blurred for Alyssa. She lost track of how many times the sailor had come with the water bucket, how many times the groan of the ship's frame had lulled her into shallow, restless sleep. Her memories loosened their grip as exhaustion wrapped around her like another set of ropes. The image of her son's face faded at the edges. His voice, once sharp and familiar, became a faint echo that she could not fully reconstruct. This was not an accident. It was the psychological erosion that came with relentless deprivation. After 26 days at sea, the ship finally reached Ostia, the main port that fed the city of Rome. By then, Alyssa's wrists were raw and infected where the ropes had bitten into her skin. Her body weighed less than it had since childhood. When they let her up into the open air, the light stabbed at her eyes. She blinked against the brightness, seeing only shifting shapes at first. Columns of stone, cranes lifting cargo, and clusters of men waiting with ledgers and purses. Being alive felt less like a blessing and more like a sentence that had just begun. Why is this side of Roman history so often missing from classroom stories about marble columns and heroic generals? Tell your thoughts in the comments. The slave market at Ostia carried its own particular kind of stench. Oil and perfume hung thick in the air, used to coat skin and hair, giving human merchandise a deceptive sheen of health. Beneath that sweet layer lay the smell of unwashed bodies confined in cramped pens, the sour breath of fear, and the metallic tang of coins constantly changing hands. The noise was a constant storm. Shouted prices, arguments over value, cries of children separated from parents, and the dull roar of a crowd that had come to purchase other people's lives. Before the auction, Alyssa underwent another transformation. Whatever remained of her Carthaginian clothing, torn fabric, smoke-stained shawls, was peeled away. The garments were thrown into a fire in front of her, their brief flare of light reflecting in her eyes. In seconds, the visible symbols of her old identity were gone. She was then given a simple tunic, rough but clean, that signaled her status more clearly than any chain. Property awaiting sale. They washed her body in cool water that raised goosebumps on her skin, removing the crusted salt and filth of the voyage. She was fed just enough bread and stew to put a hint of strength back in her limbs, enough to make her stand straight under inspection. Oil was rubbed into her arms and legs until they shone under the sun, disguising the bones pressing against her skin. A dealer walked around her slowly, examining her like a craftsman evaluating raw material, searching for scars, injuries, or any imperfection that could bring down the price. Satisfied, he gave a curt nod. Alyssa was led onto a raised wooden platform at the heart of the market. From there, the crowd spread out in every direction, a sea of faces framed by togas and tunics, some intent and calculating, others bored, as if watching livestock. The heat pressed down like a physical weight. The dealer gripped her arm, lifting it to show the line of muscle. He pulled back her lips so potential buyers could see her teeth and rattled off details in rapid Latin. Origin, age, apparent health, possible uses. Questions came from the crowd, sharp and practical. Where is she from? Carthage. Could she be used for household labor? Unknown. Was she likely fertile? Probably. She was young. The bidding began at 15 silver coins, each shout setting off short bursts of murmurs as buyers sized up their rivals. Voices rose and collided as the price climbed. 18, 20, 24. It ended at 28. A man in expensive robes stepped forward with a pouch heavy enough to thump when it hit the dealer's palm. In return, he received not just a living person, but a piece of carefully written documentation confirming ownership, as ordinary as a receipt for grain. No one asked Alyssa whether she agreed. No one needed to. In the eyes of the law that governed this market, she was an object. She understood almost none of the words spoken around her. The numbers, the jokes, the criticism, most of it flowed past her like another language of the wind. The only thing she recognized clearly was the tug on her arm when the buyer took hold and led her away from the platform. Instinct said to resist. Experience, short, brutal, and recent, taught her that resistance brought pain with no escape. So she walked. The man who bought her did not look like a monster from stories. His expression was calm, his movements composed. He seemed neither especially cruel nor notably kind. He simply appeared satisfied with a successful purchase. To him, Alyssa was not a tragedy, not a person whose son had screamed for her in a dark cellar. She was an acquisition, a new tool added to his household, expected to work, obey, and endure. Her worth lay in the tasks she could perform and the value she could return. That night, everything that remained of Alyssa's former identity began to be dismantled deliberately. A new name was given to her, Tertia, meaning third. It was not chosen because it suited her or honored a family tradition. It was chosen because she was the third slave purchased that week. This name was a label attached to a slot in an inventory, easy to track in accounts. Anyone who dared call her by her old name risked punishment. Over time, the sound of Alyssa began to feel strange, like a word from another world. The erasure continued. On the second day, her hair was shaved close to her scalp. The knife scraped along her skin while clumps of dark hair fell to the stone floor, where they were swept away without a second glance. This was not framed as an act of cruelty. It was presented as standard procedure. Newly purchased slaves often arrived with lice or other pests. Shaving everyone was more efficient than examining each head. Practicality guided humiliation. The hair her mother had once braided with gentle hands disappeared in half a minute. Language became the next target. Tertia was forbidden to speak Punic, the tongue in which she had learned lullabies and prayers. If she slipped, a blow or harsh reprimand reminded her of the rule. Other Carthaginian slaves in the household were separated, assigned different tasks or different parts of the building to limit their time together. Without shared words, shared memories withered.